Well, Matt, a huge surprise that America has woken up to this morning, and yet somehow no big surprise at all. For this is a president who has paraded around for months wearing no mask, who has consistently downplayed the threat of COVID-19. He's never really taken the virus seriously, which is why he continued with his schedule this week, despite knowing that one of his closest aides, who'd followed him around all week on Air Force One, had tested positive for COVID-19. Well, now all bets are off. His election campaign effectively at a standstill. All his events have been cancelled, so too perhaps the second presidential debate on October the 15th. His beloved stock markets that he talks so much about, well, they've gone into disarray this morning. They hate the uncertainty. They have tumbled. But Joe Biden, though, I think you can see him here. He is tested negative, as you said, Matt, today, and he will be out and about continuing to give a speech in the key swing state of Michigan today. And this will really give him an opportunity to get on the front foot again, to make COVID-19 and the virus the main talking point once again, which is what he's been trying to do all along. And there will be nothing, of course, that Donald Trump can do about it, because he will remain in the White House there behind me for the period, as his doctors are calling it, of his convalescence, while they keep what they said would be a vigilant watch on the president for any change in the mild symptoms that he is currently experiencing.
And I just went out with a test, and the First Lady just went out with a test also. So whether we quarantine or whether we have it, I don't know. So I just went for a test, and we'll see what happens. I mean, who knows?
4 hours after calling into Fox News from the White House, we all knew. When President Trump, the man who has consistently played down the coronavirus from day one, said he tested positive for COVID-19. In a tweet at 12:54 a.m, he told the world, "Tonight, the First Lady and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together." Alarm bells began ringing last night when the White House announced that Hope Hicks, one of Donald Trump's closest advisors, had contracted the virus. The president would quarantine, they said, because she had accompanied him all week, including here, boarding Air Force One just steps behind him for a campaign rally in Minnesota on Wednesday. It was on the way back from there that Hicks began to develop symptoms and isolated herself on Air Force One for the trip back to the White House. Despite the fact they knew her condition on Wednesday, yesterday the president continued with his schedule. Today it was left to his chief of staff, a maskless Mark Meadows, to face the press.
In the early hours of this morning, the minute we got a confirmatory test on the president, we felt like it was important to get the news out there at that time, and so that's why we sent out the tweet. The president does have mild symptoms. He continues to be not only in good spirits, but very energetic.
He said core members of the president's team, including the vice president and his wife, have today tested negative. But he didn't mention Mr. Trump's family, all of whom travelled with him to the presidential debate this week and sat with no masks among the audience. The contrast with Jill Biden could not have been starker. Her husband, the Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden, shared a stage with Donald Trump for 90 minutes. But today the Bidens said they've tested negative for the virus. Oh, the irony. Remember this?
I wear masks when needed. When needed, I wear masks. I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
In a tweet this morning, Mr. Biden said his thoughts were with the president and the First Lady and that he was praying for their health and safety. But there will be dozens, perhaps hundreds of others who've come into contact with Mr. Trump and his entourage. Look at the size of it here as he arrived for the presidential debate, who will now be forced to test and isolate just 32 days before the election. Nancy Pelosi, the nation's third in command, said she took a test this morning and hoped the news would serve as a wake-up call.
Going into crowds, unmasked and all the rest, was sort of a brazen invitation for something like this to happen. Sad that it did, but nonetheless hopeful that it will be a transition to a saner approach to what this virus is all about.
That complacency on display only yesterday when the president suggested the virus was soon to be a thing of the past.
I just want to say that the end of the pandemic is in sight, and next year will be one of the greatest years in the history of our country.
Wishing it away, just as he's consistently downplayed the threat of COVID-19 from the very start.
This is a flu. This is like a flu. We have lost nobody to coronavirus. It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear. Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute. When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero.
But it never fell to zero. In fact, nearly 7 months on, and the coronavirus has killed 209,000 Americans and infected more than 7.3 million others. Now, including the President of the United States himself, looking weary as he returned to the White House last night, having already succumbed to COVID-19. And now forced to remain there until such time as he recovers.
Siobhan Kennedy there. Well, how is this all going down in President Trump's political heartlands? Tonight he was supposed to be at a campaign rally in Florida. Our international editor, Lindsey Hilsum, is at the Villages. Lindsey, how is it going down?
Not very well, Jackie. You know, here in the Villages where I am, it's a retirement community. It's very pro-Trump. They're playing rather sort of mournful country music in the street at the moment, which you may hear. This rally, they wouldn't necessarily go, but it's important because it shows that he's out there. He's the man standing for freedom. He's the man who's not afraid. Not like that wuss Joe Biden hiding in his basement wearing his mask. That's the way people have been thinking about it here, and they're having to have a little bit of a rethink, which isn't easy. Florida was very badly hit by coronavirus a couple of months ago. I think it's the third worst hit state in the country. Now it's a lot better. Things have opened up here, partly because the Republican governor has insisted that everything opens up. But you're still getting 94 deaths a week on average. That's the last week, 131 yesterday. And people here, they want to believe that it's all exaggerated. That's what people were telling me today. It's not such a big deal. You know, the president, the first lady, they're just going to be fine because that's what fits in with President Trump's political narrative. And they're struggling because, you know, this time, this information, it's not fake news. Nothing interrupts golf in America's largest retirement community. But news of their leader's diagnosis has given President Trump's most ardent supporters pause.
As a president of many millions of people, and he knows that he has to be out and in around them, you know, and keeping in touch.
But he could have worn a mask more, couldn't he?
Well,
and not have such big gatherings.
That's right. That's right. There's always a choice you make. If you don't wear a mask, if you know what I mean.
Last week, the Republican governor ordered all bars and restaurants in Florida to reopen. The epidemic has subsided, but the state has lost more than 14,000 people, one of the worst death rates in the country. Freedom is all. Hence the anti-mask flash mob at a Florida supermarket last month.
We're going to win Florida. We're going to win 4 more years in the White House.
The president was here last week. His supporters largely unmasked. The cancellation of today's rally is a blow because he must win this swing state. And even in his stronghold, the Villages, some are critical.
I've been very upset about him and the mask and just not making a big deal out of it and not being presidential and being a leader.
Still,
I think that he's very cautious about who he touches and how close he is to people.
Really? But he's been having all those big rallies and he doesn't wear a mask and the people in the audience aren't wearing masks.
Right. But you know what? I know people that were in other rallies that wore masks and they got sick at the grocery store. I'm more afraid of Biden getting in and shutting our country down again and doing mask mandates.
Because many here say they're more worried about communism than coronavirus.
Lindsey Hilsum there reporting from Florida. Well, let's talk now to the political strategist Tara Setmayer, a former Republican communications advisor who now works with the Lincoln Project, a conservative organisation which is backing Joe Biden's presidential bid. Tara Setmayer, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Let's start off, first of all, with your reaction to this. Presumably, you are wishing the President and the First Lady the best recovery.
Oh, of course. We wish them well, and you never want to revel in anyone getting a deadly virus. And the right thing to do is, of course, wish them a speedy recovery. Absolutely. But when we look at the circumstances and the context and the behavior of the President of the United States, it's hard to not say you reap what you sow. He has been so incredibly irresponsible in his response, in his failed response to the coronavirus here in the United States, to the tune of 200,000 preventable deaths in the United States as a result of it. He politically weaponized mask wearing and social distancing for months. He didn't take the advice of his health policy experts. He peddled misinformation. Cornell University just came out with a study and named Donald Trump as the #1 purveyor of misinformation concerning coronavirus. He has been so irresponsible. And here we are now in the midst of a global pandemic, not getting better in the United States. And the president has now fallen victim to his own behavior.
And just a few days ago, in fact, perhaps at the very time when he was contracting the virus, he was still making fun of Joe Biden for wearing a mask.
Exactly. We just saw at that spectacle of a debate the other day where Donald Trump behaved like an unruly child, interrupting Joe Biden the entire time. And one of the juvenile, petulant things that he did was continue to make fun of Joe Biden being a responsible adult and sending the right message by being a leader and wearing a mask. It is all the consensus with the health policy experts and scientists, the epidemiologists that are looking at this virus and the nature of it have said that wearing a mask could reduce fatalities by 90%. So Joe Biden heeded those warnings. He has been responsible in the way that he has conducted his campaign. And guess who's not in quarantine COVID positive? Joe Biden.
But everything now hinges on how well the president recovers from this virus. Because if he recovers from it unscathed, like the Brazilian president Jair Bolsonaro, for example, he can then turn around to his supporters and indeed to his detractors and say, look, it wasn't that bad after all. Right?
Correct. And that's my fear here. There are millions of Americans who are doing the right thing to protect their families. There are millions of Americans who have lost their jobs, their businesses, their livelihoods as a result of this failed response to the pandemic. And the 200,000 plus dead Americans are not nobodies, as the president seemed to think when he again played this down. He knew from the very beginning that this was a deadly virus. He knew that it was airborne. He's on tape with Bob Woodward saying as much, and he purposely played this down to his political advantage in his mind. That is, in my view, disqualifying for the leader of the free world to do that.
Okay.
And as we look at moving forward, absolutely that this is going to hurt him in the campaign, because I think the American people have had enough. This is not a hoax. It's a killer. And let's hope that Donald Trump, it doesn't fall on the receiving end of that.
Right, but if he doesn't suffer badly as a result of COVID, then he's in a much stronger position coming up to Election Day, isn't he?
I don't know about that because, like I said, it's very real for many Americans. I don't know that it has any advantage to him outside of his cultish followers. They're the ones who look at this situation and he can do no wrong, right? He can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and he won't lose support. I think outside of his core supporters, his core base, the average American is looking at this and recognizes how irresponsible he has been. But he is a chief propagandist. He will say that he, short of the worst result, he will say that he fought this and has the best genes and, he miraculously recovered from it, which again would be an irresponsible message to send because COVID is deadly serious. To just tell the families of 206,000 dead Americans that it's not serious. It is.
Tara Setmayer, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And we're back now to tonight's main news. President Trump and his wife are quarantining in the White House after testing positive for coronavirus. We're joined now from Florida by Dr. Christopher Metzler, a Republican who was active in Mr. Trump's campaign for the White House in 2016. Thank you very much for coming back on the programme, Dr. Metzler, and we wish the President a speedy recovery, of course. Do you think he now regrets saying what he said during the debate with Joe Biden on Wednesday when he was making fun of the former vice president for wearing his mask too often?
Look, first of all, my only concern at this point is the health of the president and the first lady, the first family, and everyone else who has been affected, including the RNC chairwoman. So I don't think it's the time to talk about whether he regrets this or not, regrets what he says or not. As a matter of fact, I find that question quite distasteful, frankly, because at this point, we are talking about the president's health. We're talking about the nation's health. And to ask the question after he announced that, does he regret it? That is a purely political, partisan statement if I've ever heard one. It's quite frankly shocking.
It's not a statement. It's a question, Dr. Metzler. And frankly, the president has been, some would say, quite cavalier about this virus from the very beginning, sending out mixed messages about wearing masks and then making fun of his opponent about wearing one on Wednesday. I mean, of course, we all wish him the very best and his wife, but it is a very fair question to ask whether he doesn't now regret his former attitude towards the virus.
Look, I am not going to get into an argument of what the president regrets or doesn't regret. Here is the thing. The president announced last night this issue. We are working through this as a nation. And any questions, any thought about regret at this time, I find wholly inappropriate. Next question, please.
Are you worried about him? He's 74 years old and he's got a body mass index of over 30. He's clinically obese by all accounts. That puts him in a very dangerous category, doesn't it?
I am not an MD, and so I can't answer that question. However, am I concerned about the president? Of course I'm concerned about the president. I'm concerned about the president's health. I am also concerned about the fact that immediately after the president made this announcement, there's been all of this vitriol, both in the news media and across social media, making fun of this incident. Listen, whether or not you like the president, you don't like the president, and I'm not meaning you specifically, I'm talking about generically. At this point, regrets, all of those kinds of things, I just don't think is the appropriate consideration. I am very concerned about the president, as I would be concerned about anyone who has a COVID-19 diagnosis.
All right. But Dr. Metzler, we are also in the middle of an election campaign, a rather bitter one that will end in about 32 days from now. So do you think, forgive me for asking a political question, whether that this changes the political dynamics of the race in any way?
Well, of course it's going to change the political dynamics. There will now be speculation. Of course, Vice President Biden immediately came out and announced that he is COVID-free. And so are the vice president and the second lady. Of course, there is going to be a political dynamic to this. Folks are going to speculate. I've heard speculation about whether or not he really does have the virus, and this is a ploy to stop the election. Folks, give me a break. Yes, it is going to change the dynamic. It's going to change the dynamic from the standpoint. I'm sorry.
All right. I'm sorry. We've run out of time. Dr. Metzler. But thank you very much indeed for coming on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Take care.